Well, a procedure that could result in an investigation into President Cyril Ramaphosa's impeachment will be started by Parliament. Political parties must propose eminent South Africans to review the evidence needed to support an impeachment inquiry. The decision has been taken as Ramaphosa faces mounting pressure from opposition parties to resign over a robbery that occurred at a game farm he owns 2 years ago. The president is accused of covering up the crime. He's declined to respond to inquiries from opposition MPs over the event in which the country's former intelligence officer said $4 million was stolen. Joining us now to discuss this further is Member of Parliament for the Economic Freedom Fighters, Phiwaba Madokwe. Phiwaba, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us on the Weekend Report this morning.
This is Phiwaba speaking.
Apologies for that. Well, just to move forward with the conversation, the organization, the EFF, has been very vocal about deficiencies within the president's administration and his leadership. I wonder if you could just illuminate for our viewers what you hope will come out of this parliamentary process looking into a possible impeachment.
Thank you very much. I think the EFF, since the allegations, or rather the information came out around Phala, the EFF has been very consistent that the president must be held accountable and that we do not recognize him as a president of South Africa because of the seriousness of the allegations around him. The reality is that we live in a country where we have seriously high cases, even cases of violence. And to hear that a head of state was complicit or was part of an action where a female domestic worker was tortured, where criminals were tortured and possibly even bribed to not say anything about a crime that they had committed, that raises a lot of alarm. And the reality is that state resources were used, and it should have been expected that in the event that money had been stolen or anything had happened in terms of crime, that a case should have been opened and proper investigation should have been done. It is also important that the president himself should have actually declared the presence or that he had such a large amount of money on him, which at this point in time no one knows. And that could also border on tax evasion as well, because it would therefore mean that SARS was not aware of the large volumes of money that are going in and out of Phala game farm. So I think that we are still very much confident that we are going to fight tooth and nail up until the president is held accountable. This is unfortunately not the first time that we have been faced with a head of state. Even the previous head of state was the same thing, that he was protected for the longest time when the EFF was like, no, but this person should be held accountable. And it took a while for the rest of the opposition parties, including the ruling party, to actually start seeing reason. And the same is happening right now, that at first it was mostly just EFF members of Parliament who were saying that this person is not legitimate, he cannot be addressing Parliament because of the seriousness of the crimes that he has been accused of. And to a point that even we were beaten up, we were removed from Parliament violently. So there were issues of sexual harassment as well. And it is now that also opposition parties, I think, have now also started conversing as a collective that actually this person must be impeached and must be held accountable. So I think we will do the very same thing, and eventually he will be held accountable by any means necessary.
Well, I'd like for us to just focus momentarily on the process itself. Political parties have been invited to nominate a number of leading South Africans, leading minds in the country, individuals who obviously have particular expertise around issues of constitutional law, administrative law, etc., and individuals who are able to reason as per the characteristics outlined in that statement. Talk to us about as an organization, whether or not you enjoy confidence in the process that has been outlined by Parliament, a branch of the government that you as an organization have over the years unfortunately seem to enjoy a very acrimonious relationship with. So just talk to us about whether or not you enjoy some level of confidence in this process and how it's been outlined and set out.
The reality is that at this point in time, they have actually set out our processes in terms of how things will be done. And I think that we must allow them that space and wait for the outcomes. And in the event that the outcomes are not favorable, then we would then have to take other options. Opposition parties have met. They met on the 3rd of this month to sort of work as a collective in terms of what they would do in their own individual capacity and also as a collective. And one of the resolutions of that meeting was that we would now start engaging outside Parliament different stakeholders who would then be able to assist and advise in terms of what other options are there in the event that the Parliament process does not work. And my understanding is that the next meeting is scheduled for the 10th of August, where again opposition parties will seek and find a way forward. I think that also in the event that Parliament does not allow for a secret ballot, that is where we're going to have a serious problem, because that is the only way that we can guarantee that even those who are in the ruling party are actually able to express themselves relating to the impeachment process without being exposed or without feeling that they will be attacked to a certain extent. Because the reality is that should they be found to be against whatever the ruling party says, there will be consequences to a certain extent. So people must be given an opportunity to decide by themselves as members of Parliament. And the secret ballot is the only way that would guarantee that. But opposition parties are looking at even avenues outside the current Parliament process. But at this point in time, it's a bit premature to actually cut aspersions that this might not happen. It's only when the process has started that we are going to, if there are issues, we will then raise those issues. And if we're not happy with that process, then we'll work on the second one. As I said, we will fight for the impeachment of the president by any means necessary, which therefore means at this point in time, we're doing all the investigations to make sure that we are well equipped, that if the one process does not work, what other processes are there.
Another concern, Phiwaba, that has been raised around this impeachment inquiry is that it may, in fact, be being set up a little prematurely, given the fact that we already have a significant number of law enforcement agencies looking into the Phala farm robbery incident. It may, in fact, even be a duplication of resources, so to speak. As an organization, what's your response to that concern being raised, that we're now beginning a parliamentary process that's going to review what we assume to be the exact same evidence that we have the Hawks and a number of other law enforcement agencies already combing through? There seems to be an apprehension around that duplication. What's your response to that concern?
I do not think that there is a duplication. Like I said before, that we need to look at all possible options. And the reality is that the president is the head of state. He is accountable to the Parliament itself. And in the event and the seriousness of these crimes that he has committed, to a point that at this point in time, if even the law enforcement agencies, including Parliament, had taken seriously the allegations, by now we should not have even been speaking about Cyril Ramaphosa as the president of South Africa, because he should have been suspended. He even went to a point where he said, look, he must step aside up until the investigations have been completed. And then in the event that anything, but the fact that he's still the president of South Africa, it therefore means that the Parliament process must also be taken into consideration. The gravity of the crimes are extremely serious, and if we do not start a Parliament process as well, where other opposition parties and other parties are part of the committee that will then hold or that will lead the investigation, as opposed to law enforcement, because even with law enforcement agencies, some of them are actually implicated in the Phala game matter, which therefore means that what guarantee do we have that they will actually do thorough investigations and they will not actually try to hide the realities that, that is what is happening. So we need to actually use all avenues, including the parliamentary process, which, by the way, was done with the previous president as well. And there were never any issues of its duplication. It's this and this. It's not the first time that this is being done. So why can it not be done with Cyril Ramaphosa?
Phiwaba, before we let you go, I do want to touch on another matter that is related to Phala and Parliament, and that is, of course, the outcomes of that independent investigation that was carried out by Advocate Elizabeth Baloyi-Mere. The outcomes, of course, are stating that she found nothing untoward and found no evidence to support claims of gender-based violence or sexual harassment in the forced removal of EFF MPs during that presidential debate back in June. Your response to that particular outcome, and what are the options before the organization at this moment?
It's the same thing with that one as well, that I think the EFF had said so from the word-go that we would do everything humanly possible to guarantee justice for EFF MPs. What is interesting as well is the tone and the language that is used in the press statements of Parliament, which to a certain extent they show that the investigation itself was to a certain extent biased, because it can never be that you are saying that you are investigating people who are victims and then you then say no, the findings against disruptive EFF MPs. The language itself shows that there was already a preconceived idea about who the EFF MPs were. Secondly, I think the investigation mostly is around the fact that EFF MPs were removed from Parliament and they refused to get out. And that is why the PPS was called in to remove them physically. So, and it happened that was violent. But the interesting part is that some of us were not being requested to be removed from Parliament, but we were removed nonetheless. Like I said, they literally just wrote in most of the female EFF MPs and they bolted them out without any reason. What is also interesting is that there are findings that are out, but up until now, no one has actually contacted me as a victim and as someone who has actually lodged a complaint to ask what exactly happened. So it is very interesting to find out what are they basing these findings on.
Right.
If the very same victims that were part of that have never been contacted since we made that complaint. And like I said, if one can even look at the press statements of Parliament, you can see that in most of the things, they are not considering the fact that we were victimized as EFF MPs. It's a matter of, no, the Parliament was right, the Speaker was right. And therefore, we were expecting these kinds of findings. That's why we then said, look, we are going to actually take all the avenues. If you remember, you can even look at the videos. The President of the state was even laughing while women were being manhandled. And to a certain extent, that says a lot about how we, not even how Parliament will speak out against gender-based violence, but it is very easy for them to actually justify it when it is naked by themselves.
Right, Phiwaba, unfortunately, we are going to have to leave it there. We have run out of time, but thank you so much for coming on to today's program and sharing your insights with us. That's Economic Freedom Fighters MP Phiwaba Madokwe joining us there to talk to us about that parliamentary inquiry, that process that has been kick-started into a possible impeachment of the president.